Anna, thank you for being here. I'm here today with Anna Guo. Anna Guo is doing some of what I think is some of the what I think is some of the most important work in legal AI and legal tech right now, which is doing a lot of work with evaluations and benchmarking and figuring out how well AI does in legal tasks, how well different AI legal tools do in different legal tasks, and measuring sort of the distance between what we want AI to do and what it's actually doing. So Hannah, first of all, thank you for being here. If you want to give a little bit more of an intro, a little bit of background about yourself, before we get started, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it's really interesting that you said measuring the distance of what we want AI to do and what it can do. Another way to frame it is measuring the amount of delta, which is the distance of what humans can currently do compared to how much AI can elevate a human to do. And that's, I think, a distance that can be measured and that we are measuring in both sides. One is how much it's falling short of our expectations, and also how much it is actually elevating our performance as lawyers with the assistance of these tools. So that's a really interesting way that you're framing it. Um, just wanted to point that out. But yeah, I'm Anna. I'm currently based in Singapore, and I'm the founder of Legal Benchmarks AI, where we look at and evaluate how AI tools perform within the legal domain, as you've shared. So we're going to publish our second report um, in September. It's 15th of September. So super excited about that. And thank you, Masai, for just bouncing ideas with me and sharing knowledge on both WhatsApp and LinkedIn. I've received very helpful insights and reports. So hopefully we can continue the conversation well into the future.
Absolutely. It's been great. And I mean I've learned a ton of stuff too, just hearing what you guys are doing and some of the different findings you've had. Do you want to start maybe from the beginning? How did you were a lawyer, you're an in-house lawyer to my understanding. And then how do you go from being an in-house lawyer to now doing AI evaluations and benchmarking?
Yeah, I think that's a less of a jump than you going from a soccer player to now building automations for illegal tools. Mine is a lot more boring, but basically, I've always been interested in startups. I built my own startup before I went in-house. So in between the stretch, I was in private practice and in-house. I did that. And so even when I was working in companies as a legal counsel, I was hyper aware of what's happening around me in terms of how technology is changing the way that lawyers were working. And so when AI came onto the scene a few years ago, I was arrowed by my community and my friends who are lawyers to help them figure out what is hype and what is the real capability of these AI tools. And so that's why I was like, okay, let me just write about it on LinkedIn and see if people's interested. So I posted about testing AI tools, and that post kind of blew up in relation to the size of audience I had at the time. And I was like, okay, cool. People are really interested in this. So let me dig deeper. And now this is very, um, very deep that I am in this rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for those people that are not familiar with evaluations and benchmarks, can you kind of give a rundown on what is an evaluation or an eval and what are benchmarks?
Oh man, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. Seriously, it's like a topic that not a lot of people, even people who are building AI businesses, know about or know deeply about. And I know this because I am married to someone who is working in building a AI product, and they've been around for 3 years, and they had no idea what Evals was. So my understanding of what evals is the process. So okay, there is a term similar in in software for engineers of how they do testing of tools and functions in order to improve its performance. There is a terminology for it that I have forgotten. Unit testing.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, unit testing, system tests. Yeah, okay. So it's similar to that, but then that will mean nothing to lawyers, right? Like, what is a unit test?
Yeah.
Um, but it's basically putting these AI solutions and tools under stress tests to improve their performance within a special domain. And in this case, it is a performance within the legal domain because there's a lot of benchmarks currently available in the market on MMLU, on different kinds of Hugging Face related platforms for general performance, also for performance within the engineering context, but downstream in the different specific professional domains, there is very, very little information on how these models and how these solutions are performing within, let's say, legal or finance or healthcare. And if there are data on the performance, it's usually maybe published by the vendors themselves, or it's based on more academic tasks that doesn't really reflect real world scenarios. And what I mean by more simplified or academic tasks are tasks like multiple choice, like yes or no, very narrow-ended questions. And we know that in real legal work, you're never going to be given a multiple choice question, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you're not always going to get clear questions. You're not always going to get a question where there's always an answer. And this is what lawyers are expected to handle on a day-to-day basis. So we also want to put the AIs through these kind of stress tests for the legal domain.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of the difficult thing to figure out, right? In building legal evaluations is there's a lot of complexity in the legal field and a lot of nuance. And how do you, well, this is my question to you is how do you go about building tests or evaluations for AI that are reflective of the nuance in the legal field?
You can never fully do that for any kind of study, but you can do your best and you can build a foundation or a framework for how people can think about refining it in the future. So I don't think that, one study or evals, I mean, and you can see like now with all of the different evals reports out there, everybody takes a different approach. They don't even have the same definition for accuracy. Why is that? It's because evals is still in its infancy exploration stage. And so everyone is exploring. And I think this is what's really cool about the space. We all know that a lot of people know that it's very important, but not everybody have the right answers on how to design something that can capture not only the nuance, but the subjective nature in many of the tasks. I know that's one of the initial questions that we connected on is how do you even capture that and quantify those standards that many lawyers don't even share explicitly. They're all implicit standards that are in their heads, and it could be different kinds of standards. So that is definitely a challenge. However, that being said, there are some ways you can try to build a better foundation. So in our case, what we do is we get input and task contributions from lawyers globally. So then you have at least a diverse representation. And then when we look at the tasks, we taxonomize and categorize them into different categories. So for example, the second report that we're publishing on contract drafting, it's only we're only using junior to mid-level tasks, not senior, very sophisticated, complex tasks yet, because I don't think the level of sophistication for a lot of AI solutions out there can fully handle more senior, more complex, in fact, scenarios that's very context heavy. but having that broad representation, I think, of regions of different kind of work that lawyers do in the context of drafting, it would be like different types of contracts, right? There's employment contracts, there are commercial contracts, there are MSAs or stock shareholder agreement contracts. So trying to get that diverse representation in every angle, I think, is one way that you can achieve this goal.
Yeah, yeah. And I think kind of making it a little bit maybe more well to make it kind of concrete, an easy evaluation to do is like determining whether something is JSON or not. Or so if something is if we're evaluating it in an LLM, right? If we look at it in a large language model and we ask it to write some code for us, and if it we can easily
Mhm.
test whether that code works or doesn't work, you know? So it's a fairly easy thing to evaluate. Maybe could you give an example of a legal task that's a lot less black and white to where it's like it's very
Mm.
difficult to measure whether the LLM is actually doing the job correctly or not.
Yeah, there are a few. So if you read the first report, insert report, I don't know, screenshot on
Yeah.
the right.
Yep.
um, I actually have a section on AI weaknesses.
Yep.
So I think that is simplifying um, based on what we observed, the patterns that we see AI consistently fail in.
Hmm.
Um, and so if you want to stress test your AI, you can reference those weaknesses and come up with either synthetic or even the tasks that we gave as examples to test your AI. So, for example, one question we were talking about before is how does AI behave when the information you're asking it to extract isn't there? That's a very simple and very common scenario. So if you just test it, let's say on a party's obligations for indemnity, when that party doesn't have an obligation there, seeing how AI behaves in that scenario is quite interesting because that if it does make up a fact or obligation when there isn't, and it's very confident about it, doesn't tell you that there isn't information there, then that puts you to question, can I trust anything
Right.
that this AI says, especially in a professional working context when the stakes are a little bit higher? Then that would definitely mean that you have to double check everything um, that it says.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So and so to my understanding, you guys have worked on and created two reports now doing evaluations of various different LLMs and different general assistants, also some legal tech platforms as well. What have been some of the most interesting, surprising, and consequential findings from your report, would you say, that you can share?
Oh, there's a lot.
Yeah.
um, well, I think the most interesting part about it is how humans perform.
Hmm.
I mean, we look at a few angles in this report. The first angle is how the legal AI tools perform against the general purpose AI tools.
Hmm.
We will have a ranking for that. The performance of these domain specific tools against general purpose tools was a little bit surprising for me, but then not so much at the same time. Because on one hand, you would think, oh, domain specific purpose trained tools should be more accurate, should be more helpful to the users. But then on the other hand, we also know that a lot of the general purpose LLMs, they're actually higher performing in its
Yeah.
raw form
Yep.
compared to when it's been integrated into a system. And then there's tons of guardrails that's built on top of it. And also, I think there's even debates now that, or I've seen people discuss that the LLM providers, they're not providing the best access to their models via API, and they reserve the best version of the models for their own applications. I
Right.
don't know if you have a discussion on that.
It's my first time hearing that.
Yeah, but I think it completely makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you are Anthropic or if you are Google, you would probably still provide a version of the model API to like all of the application builders, but you would want to reserve the best version of the product for your own interfaces. Just makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. And then is there any, do these different platforms disclose whether they do any fine tuning or not, or are they just using the language models
Hmm.
by API in out of the box or
I think a lot of them do, and this is something I'm still trying to figure out. I don't want to use the right term, like the wrong terminology here. But fine tuning is that after the model is already trained on the data, the application layer can still fine tune the model based on their own data set. Is that what's happening, or how is it happening?
well, so my understanding of fine tuning is when you take an existing language model, and usually for the larger ones, if it's an OpenAI, one of their closed source models, or Anthropic, you have to obviously get it from the enterprise itself, and then you train it, you do extra training basically on top of training the model on a specific data set that's relevant to your application. So that's
Mm-hmm.
basically my understanding. And then obviously there's if the language model is already good enough out of the box and you don't need to fine tune it, then you can just use it either via API call or I mean via API, as it is.
Yeah. I haven't had a deep discussion with all of the vendors on that. I'm sure some of them do fine tuning, but the I think the what a lot of people are also discovering is that fine tuning may not really increase the performance of these models as they're getting so good,
Mm.
right? Um, and I think this is also like goes to your question as well. It's like whether oh sorry goes to my point as whether like legal AI will definitely outperform general purpose AI. It's a really tough um, question to answer across the board, but it can be explained either way. But anyways, the second most surprising finding I think would be human performance as well, because we do have a human baseline, and finding out that humans may not always outperform AI solutions, and in which specific scenarios does that happen, and what is AI and human strengths in comparison to each other. I think those are really, really interesting findings and surprising findings, at least for me. It makes me really think about what the future of our career path should look like and how we should best collaborate with these tools in the workplace.
Yeah. Oh, can you say a little bit more about that? About what are those, what were those strengths that you discovered from the AI side, and what were those strengths or weaknesses that you discovered from the human side?
Humans are definitely better at more nuanced and more context heavy drafting,
Hmm?
because they're able to collect and actively gather context that AI is not able to do. So AI is only able to do whatever, only to perform whatever based on whatever you give to it, feed it as information.
Yep.
Um, the other thing is AI is incredibly now strong at producing standard boilerplate related contracts, contract related language. So, for example, AI can very consistently produce a notice provision. There was one task that is about producing a notice provision, and all the AIs passed, and humans were the only ones that failed. Yeah,
That's kind of crazy.
yeah, and the humans failed in that scenario because it didn't provide a complete notice provision that included email, or it wasn't comprehensive enough.
Hmm.
Um, that a usual notice provision usually would include. Humans missed out on that detail. And all of the AIs were able to, from its like training data, because it consumed so many publicly available contracts, they were always able to produce a full comprehensive notice provision.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that really puts into question, like, first of all, whether humans are always going to be superior than AI in drafting contracts. And second of all, I think it's very, I mean, commonly accepted that our knowledge is limited to our own experience, and AI has ingested so much more data,
Yep.
and so much more information that for standard related contracts where there's a lot of public data on it, and if the task is simple enough, AI could potentially be more reliable than a human.
That kind of speaks to it speaks to the strength of AI, doesn't it? Right? That AI is good at consuming like just tons and tons of data, right? So even if there's like some obscure contract out of, one out of a million contracts or out of, a few million contracts that, or a million notice provisions that can deal with a specific situation, computers can consume and process and train on that enormous data set or just a really big data set, right? Where a human being just isn't going to have the same capacity to go over and look at and train themselves on that much data.
Yeah, so I would actually add a caveat to that, which is in scenarios where there is mass amounts of data on that are like very standard or very common scene scenarios, I think AI could be potentially more trustworthy in humans. It's like if you if you ask a random person like the recipe for making a spaghetti bolognese, compared to asking AI, I would trust the AI more because there's just like, 10,000 recipes online
Right,
for spaghetti bolognese. And that human probably only made it once or twice,
right,
um, or a few times in their lives. Yeah, that human would be me. Some people may have it a little more, but for more obscure fact patterns and scenarios, I would actually trust the expert human more. It's because when AI doesn't have that much training data
yep,
on a certain topic, um, we talked about this before, it is more likely to hallucinate something
yep,
when that information doesn't exist or there's scarce information in that area. And we've seen in the data for the report that humans are less likely to hallucinate. They would rather refuse to answer. Like, and
right.
that's the thing that's very frustrating about humans, right? Is that in some of the tasks when the information is incomplete or ambiguous, like humans had attitude. The
Yeah.
answer was NA,
Yeah.
NA. And I saw it and I was like, oh wow, like it got failed. So that's why it got escalated for human review. And I was like, hey, I would never give an NA answer, right?
Right, right, right,
Humans would be like, what the heck are you talking about?
right,
Clarify yourself. Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. So it's in situations where there's a lot of precedent, AI is good. But in situations where it's creative or there's no precedent or it's very, very limited data around the precedent, then we're not, that's better for human beings to do.
For expert, not any human being.
For experts. Got,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah, I think this is also another thing that we uncovered, uh, which is human in the loop doesn't mean any human in the loop. Because for some of these tasks, human plus AI assistance, like some of these tasks were completed by humans with AI assistance. So just like to give you the background, for the human baseline, humans can choose to use whatever tool they usually use. They can also choose not to use any AI tool or any other tool. They just need to report what kind of tools they used. And so we looked at the performance of humans with AI tools that they use for the tasks, and the reliability rate did increase based compared to when they didn't use the tool. However, it was still lower than just AI alone. So meaning
Oh,
that,
wow.
yeah, sometimes with human in the loop,
It gets worse.
it gets worse.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
wow,
so
yeah.
the question is why? Why? Right.
Yeah.
And I think my hypothesis is that when you're not an expert in a certain area and you have an AI output, we always have this inclination when you're trying to deliver a work product or whatever to fine tune it and to like tweak around with it, right? Um, and that tweaking around could actually make it more inaccurate than what it is out of the box.
Yeah.
Same with fine tuning could, sometimes work
Yeah.
in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
So that's my hypothesis. It has to be someone who knows what they're doing, because if you think you're a half expert, you half know what you're doing, and you're refining the answer, it can may very well make it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, I don't know if you saw this, Sam Altman gave a talk somewhere in government, I forget where, but he was talking about the he was talking about I think it was 1997 when Deep Blue beat Kasparov in chess. And Deep Blue was the AI engine. Kasparov was the best chess player in the world at the time, and the computer beat the best human in chess. And then for a period of time, I think for 3 to 6 months, the best chess playing was done by AI and humans together, right? So AI would suggest 4 or 5 moves, and then the human would choose the best move out of those ones. But as the AI models kept training on more and more chess games, after 3, 4, 5, 6 months, a year or two, any human input would just make the AI models worse at chess, you know? So it's kind of
Yeah, yeah.
reminds me of that. Yeah.
Someone, Nate, actually wrote about this, and it's called a bitter lesson. I think
I
there's a
read that.
term for it. Yeah,
Yeah, I read that. I
right.
read that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great article that he wrote, which is it could be the same in legal,
Yeah.
which is we think that our human expert input is like so important, it will make everything better, but not necessarily.
Yeah. I should remember to link that article to, I think it's Nate Kostelnik or something like that. We talked about context a little bit earlier and how important context is for AI performance, especially in legal, but in general, but especially in legal. Can you say a little bit more about that? If you can talk about how useful is AI without context? How useful is AI? What's the upside of AI? What's the potential of AI with the correct context? And then how do we give AI models, how do we give them access to the context that they need?
A lot of legal tasks are very context dependent. So I think AI can be helpful for coming up with brainstorming ideas or more open-ended queries or simple queries like standard drafting notice provision, for example. It can be very helpful with low context because it doesn't need that much context in that scenario. The inherent training data is already sufficient to be the context you need to give something that is helpful for the user. But when you need it in a high context scenario, for example, drafting based on a template or drafting based on bespoke terms of agreement between parties, then that is when context becomes extremely important. And AI applications working in silos, they're not going to be able to have access to all of that context. And that's where the work that people like you are doing come into play, which is building out all of these workflows and integrations for AI applications so they don't work in a silo and that they can draw on the context either from the organization or from other parts of the user's knowledge base. So for example, when you're drafting a template agreement, what are the context? You need context from the template, right? You need context based on the fact patterns, like what did the parties agree to? That could be very well documented in an email chain. So that is context. You might have specific tweaks you need to make, but you have a certain way you would like to present that in the clause form. So you might have a clause library of the terms that you like to use. So all of those things are specific details that could be in different places within your working environment. And so the ability for AI to ingest that so you don't have to spoon feed AI all of those contexts, I think is incredibly important, and it will help these applications perform a lot better.
Yeah. And how optimistic can lawyers be about the performance of AI with context? Is there a hard limit at the top that, no matter how much context we give AI, it can't do insert thing? Is there anything like that, or how optimistic should people be about that?
I think today, the answer today compared to the answer tomorrow would look very different because it's changed the landscape. We know it's changing so fast. We're constantly behind um, in terms of trying to keep up with advancements in this space. So the answer today would be that I'm not highly optimistic of the capability of context ingestion. I mean, it's already incredible. Actually, I should be grateful. I take that back. Because we always get complacent, right? Like we always want more. Like when AI couldn't ingest more than 1 page or 2 page of context, we're like, oh, it sucks. Like it can't ingest, I don't know, a 20, 30 page one. And now it can consume so much content. You can upload thousands of pages for many of these applications, and it can process them. But there's a difference between how much you can upload and how much it will actually digest. And I think that's something that a lot of AIs fail silently in is
Yeah.
that okay, they boast a context window of however many tokens, but then when you do upload something that's like way below the limit, um, in current days, you still cannot expect that it has really, really processed all of that context.
Yeah.
And I think you can resonate with that as well, right?
Yeah, I was just reading about this. There was I think they built out an evaluation, funnily enough, about how well AI finds things in its context, right? Different LLMs. Because and I think the evaluation was something like, they write let's say they write a story that's 200,000 tokens long. I don't know what that would be like, 40,000 words. Let's say they write a short story about a mouse and a bird or something, right? But they would include in the middle of that story a couple of items for a pizza recipe, like right in the middle of the story. And then they would finish the story, right? And so they would evaluate after giving the LLM all of that context, how well could it find the ingredients for that pizza recipe that was just randomly pasted right in the middle of that story. And a lot of LLMs didn't really do that well at finding that of picking out those small details in the context. I think the other thing also with prompting, like there's a temptation to make prompts that are overly verbose, 6, 7, 8 pages long. But a lot of
Yeah.
times, LLMs they don't read the middle really. They just read the beginning and the end. And
Mm.
you can tell that a lot of times exactly what you're saying with even with large context windows, they don't do a really good job of processing and understanding everything and that it ingests as context.
Yeah, for sure. So then are you saying that the recommendation for people shouldn't be that they give extremely detailed prompts like what I'm seeing right now? Some engineers are like, oh, why don't you just write a very detailed prompt for a few pages long, and it will basically fix any problem that you complain about for these AI outputs. Like be extremely detailed, be extremely structured, marked out format.
Yeah. Yeah, Markdown, yeah. I think it's a good question, and I don't have the final answer on it. I think that's kind of what evaluations are for, right? If you try a long prompt and it works better than a short prompt, then use a long prompt. If you try a long prompt with Claude and it works well, but you tried the same long prompt with Gemini and it doesn't work well, then use a long prompt with Claude, use a smaller prompt with Gemini. I think it depends on so many factors, but I do think
Yeah.
that there's still we're still even as context windows expand. Exactly what you're saying is true. We're still trying to work to make sure that LLMs actually understand and process all of the content that is within its window as context.
Mm-hmm. And you've touched on a few very like important points, caveats that people don't maybe talk about that much, which is a prompt that is long may not necessarily be better. That's the first one. And the second one is a prompt that works for one model might not work for another model,
Right. Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and sorry, what was the third one that was in my head? And a prompt that works today may not work tomorrow. Because as soon as there's a model update, the same prompt could no longer yield really good performance.
Yeah.
And so things are changing a lot. And then I think the question also is how much of that burden should be on the user and how much of it should be on the application on the application layer,
Yeah.
because one camp thinks that, okay, yeah, it's a user that should take responsibility to be more clear in their communication, to figure out, how to prompt correctly. Whereas other people is like, it should be on the obligation of the it should be on the obligation of the application layer to make it easier for users to use. That's what you're paying these applications to do.
Yeah.
So that's also an interesting side discussion.
Yeah.
And also, there's a lot of discussion around multi-turn dialogue, because for a long time, it was like believed that we should learn how to be prompt engineers, and English is now the new coding language.
Yeah.
But then I think what is emerging right now, and then there's also a counter to that emergence, is that uh, you should always iterate with your AI, as in, like, it should be a multi-turn dialogue and it's never just a single shot conversation. And therefore, you can just have a stream of consciousness kind of dialogue with the AI, turn on voice mode, for example,
Yeah.
and then it's smart enough to figure out what you want, and then you guys can just go back and forth in the chat.
Yeah.
However, there's another study that came out to counter that, saying that, and the title of the study, I think, is something along the lines of AI gets lost in conversation,
Yeah.
which means like the quality of the outputs will like digress to the degree that it becomes like completely irrelevant to the initial discussion when
Yep.
you have multi-turn dialogue.
Yeah. 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 Because I think, I mean, there's also, I guess, context or memory that has to do with the chat, right? Because it's not just the outside context that it's pulling in, but also has
Yeah.
to store memory about the conversation that it's having in that session. So that's another thing to think about too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it was interesting because it kind of relates to what you talked about earlier with using AI as a thought partner and how that relates to how people, obviously, a lot of lawyers are concerned with the accuracy of AI and trying to figure out how to use it. And I think having that, what you talked about earlier with AI as a thought partner and how that can help to mitigate or decrease the importance of absolute accuracy to some degree, and can also help AI to not only be useful in low level work, but also help AI to be useful in higher level work. I think that's a really interesting point too.
Yeah. That was one of the findings in our report, which is because we have three separate rounds of evaluations for performance within contract drafting. The first round is on reliability, which looks at the factual and legal accuracy of the output and also whether it is relevant to the query. So this is more objective metrics. And so some of the AIs might fail on this round because they weren't 100% accurate, let's say, in their output. But the second round, we look at usefulness or helpfulness. Usefulness actually made up of helpfulness, adequate length and clarity of the answer. And just because an AI output wasn't 100% accurate doesn't make it any less useful in some contexts. And especially, we found from the critiques that lawyers gave, and this is double blind review. So they would give it a rating, and then they would also write the critiques of why they gave it that rating. That a lot of lawyers really found AI outputs that not only provided a draft, but also provided a risk warning for the lawyer to be incredibly helpful. They receive very, very high helpfulness ratings for that. So just as an example, let's say you want to now sell alcohol in Saudi Arabia, and you're asking the AI, help me draft a contract to sell alcohol in the Middle East or anywhere where it is most likely banned. Do you want the AI to just, follow your instructions and then draft that contract? Or would you find it helpful that at the end it says risk warning, you might consider that this may be illegal
Yeah.
or heavily restricted in the Middle East?
Yeah. You posted about this recently.
I posted a poll question.
A poll, I
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah. So So it's very interesting because like some lawyers might think, oh, it should just do what it's asked, right? Nothing more, nothing less. Whereas a majority of the lawyers would hope that the AI can help flag that risk. And that is not low level work,
Yeah.
right? That is very high level judgment based legal expert work that
Right.
now humans are expecting AI to also shoulder.
Right. Right. Because I mean, it's taking in context about the like geopolitical context and a bunch of other stuff to be able to give that answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like initially I thought, oh, because lawyers want to preserve their ultimate judgment and expertise that, that it's fine if it just drafts a output, like a whatever you ask it to draft. But that's not the case.
Yeah. I think that's pretty interesting also because I mean the AI you end up with AI doing really really high level stuff.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Ultimately, you as a user should make the judgment call of whether it's valid or not, right? Because it could give you a completely irrelevant risk warning, but at least it's flagged to you so that it's within the periphery of the considerations that you have.
Yeah.
Um, so that was interesting. But okay, a side note on that, I wonder what you think. As a user, would you want the AI not only to flag the risk to you, but to alter the draft output so it is compliant with the law?
I would rather have those happen in two separate steps. I'd rather have
Mm,
it generate the first output first along with the risk warning, and then afterwards, if kind of with a human in the loop saying, would you like me to draft a compliant version? And then
yeah,
you can
yeah.
say yes, and then have it draft the compliant version afterwards.
So it's very interesting that some of these drafts, just in the initial output, change the clause to make it compliant.
Mm,
And that is a hidden assumption, right? Because like at first I was like, oh, that's a really useful feature. Like they just made it help me make it compliant. But then if you think about it, first of all, that isn't what the user asked for.
right.
And then, also, it could not be the right judgment call in the context because sometimes for law firms that work on high risk deals or they work on not standard negotiations, they may want to include that specific kind of clause, and they have some knowledge of it. Might be like they got an exemption from Saudi Arabia, for example, and why, like in that scenario, AI shouldn't be the one that's making its own judgment and overriding that of the user. So that could actually be a very risky scenario as well when it happens.
Anna, thanks so much for coming on. If where is the best place for people to find you and find more of your work?
So definitely on LinkedIn because I've been sharing some of my insights behind the scenes and musings and memes on LinkedIn. And they can definitely also see the report and other related material on the website at www.legalbenchmarks.ai.
Nice.